Good evening, good evening, good evening. Glad you're here tonight. We have a good number assembled. First of all, I have a couple of prayer requests to pass on. If you would please, first of all, add Shirley Morris to your prayer list. Miss Shirley is hospitalized in Paducah. I'm not sure if it's at Baptist Health or Lures, but please add to your prayer list Shirley Morris, Max Morris's widow, for those that want some association of the family. And also, please add Glenn Rogers to your prayer list, brother of Franklin Rogers. He's undergoing some treatment and is in need of our prayers. Glenn Rogers, as well as Shirley Morris. Young at Hearts will meet tomorrow. Not only will you be meeting for class, but also be having lunch followed at 11:30 or so. You're having vegetable soup, cornbread, and all the fixes, and I know you'll look forward to sharing that time together. That's tomorrow. Class at 10:30, lunch at 11:30. Daughters of Dorcas and Young Men's Training Class will meet this coming Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And please be reminded, we all begun our food drive. Canned soup, instant potatoes, mac and cheese, or cereal. Those items, please, and you may leave them in the commons area. I ask Darren Wilson. Darren, if you'll lead our minds in our closing prayers, we're dismissed from this assembly.
God will take care of you.
Be not dismayed, whatever betide, God will take care of you. Beneath His wings, let love abide, God will take care of you. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you. Through days of toil and heart that fail, God will take care of you. When danger's tears your path assail, God will take care of you. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you. All you may need, He will provide. God will take care of you. Nothing you ask will be denied. God will take care of you. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you.
Day by day.
Day by day, and with each passing moment, strength I find to meet my trials here. Trusting in my Father's wise bestowment, I have no cause for worry or for fear. He whose heart is kind beyond all measure gives unto each day what He deems best.
So a little over a decade ago, when Muammar Gaddafi's regime fell in Libya, journalists went in and they were going through government buildings and found tapes, B-tapes, of certain events. And one that really shocked them was, I believe it was April the 7th, 1984. And it was, I think, called University Day, but they were going to have a basketball game there in this huge gymnasium there in, what was the city? In Benghazi, there in Libya. But when the television cameras turned on, there was a guy kneeling on his knees in handcuffs with a microphone in front of him. And then there was a table of a few men, and essentially what it said in their language was the people's prosecution. Apparently, they learned Gaddafi had suspended the rule of law. There was no practice of law in Libya at that time. And this fellow that was here, he was accused of being a traitor. And the only thing he ever did was to speak against the regime. And so him and others, and for years they did this on April the 7th, they would hold public executions and they would televise them to all of Libya in order to make a point. And, think about it, and I remember when Benghazi failed, when it failed rather, and Gaddafi was captured, and I don't know if you're aware of course, we had an ambassador, Chris Stevens, that died over in Benghazi. But you think about the one thing that Gaddafi did. He wanted power so much, and he was willing to consolidate it by taking lives, suppressing dissident voices, or any form of opposition. That's what happens when humanity has power. When Paul was preaching to the Athenians, he said, God who made the world and everything in it, since he's Lord of heaven and earth, doesn't dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. You have our God and Heavenly Father who possesses all power, unlike a dictator or a tyrant. And what does he choose to do with it? He chooses to come into the world as a man. And rather than have everyone bow down, he sacrifices himself. The nature of the kingdom of God is unlike this world. I know there's a part where in Thessalonica, when the Christians have gone there and they're evangelizing, someone says, these who have turned the world upside down have come here too. If you're used to the way that humanity does things, the gospel's very counter to that. Rather than a king who takes on this royal golden diadem, he chose a crown of thorns. Rather than a royal robe of scarlet, he's given a drape and mocked. Rather than being enthroned on this magnificent throne, he's enthroned on a cross. You see, humanity thinks you got to do it one way, but God says, let me show you how you're supposed to do it. Having all power, he doesn't abuse humanity, and the thing is, he gives us a choice. Now, obviously, if we could have a conversation with God, he would say, I wish that all men would be saved. But he doesn't force you to do it. He gives you the option. Obviously, there are consequences based on what you choose. But you look at power in the hands of a human, and then you look at God who possesses all power, and there you see a benevolent, loving, gracious God versus a tyrannical dictator. And which is worth following? One that rules out of fear, or one that pursues with love? Think about that difference between those two. And maybe it could be said that of you and me, our world has been turned not upside down, but right side up. Because we've obeyed the gospel, things are as they should be. And so that's the invitation tonight. If you need to obey the gospel, to profess your faith in Jesus and to be buried with him in baptism, do it. If you want to study some more, let's talk about it, and we'll study the Bible some more, and then we'll get to the questions and answers portion. But whatever you do, give it serious thought. And just if you need to, come forward as we stand and sing.
Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my will and make it thine. It shall be no longer mine. Take my heart, it is thine own. It shall be thy royal throne.
Our Father in heaven, thank you for the blessings of this day. We thank you that you are our ultimate power and also for your mercy, your grace, and your love. I thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight to study from your word. Pray that you would open our hearts as we go to class now and that you would lead those who lead us in that study. I pray for all those who stand in need, that you would touch their lives, Father, as needed. And pray most of all that each and every one would come to know and accept Jesus as their Savior before it's too late. In his name I pray. Amen.
All right, it is good to see you tonight. Everybody seems to be in good spirits. The warm weather today probably helped a lot. I tell you, Monday and Tuesday were rough, at least for this early in the fall, to have some super cold weather, but hey, we survived, and here we are tonight. It's great to see you. And if you're visiting, there were notes back in the lobby that you could pick up or in the foyer. And we are studying the life and times of Joseph. We're in part 2. And tonight we're going to be in Genesis 48 and 49. And that's where Jacob blesses the sons of Joseph. And he also blesses his own 12 sons. All right, it's now the second year of the famine, a famine that's going to last for 7 years. And a little bit of review in chapter 47, verse 26. We're told that Joseph instituted a program, a law, if you will, that he would give the people seed to plant, and when they harvested their crops, they would return 20% to Pharaoh, and they would get to keep 80% for themselves. Kind of a sharecropping arrangement, and it sounds pretty good to me. When you really need seed, you're willing to share, and you get to keep 80%. That's a lot better than some businesses are able to do. One that I like them because of their business philosophy and their Christian approach to it, and also because their food is really good, and that's Chick-fil-A. I imagine we've got some Chick-fil-A fans in here, and I did not know when we moved to Murray that you could actually find Chick-fil-A in this town. And our son, who lives in Saudi Arabia, came to visit us, and he said, well, Mom and Dad, you just go to the Murray State Student Center and their food court, and they got Chick-fil-A right there. I read one time about their requirements. First of all, you've got to have a ton of experience, successful experience in the restaurant business. And then, when you go into business, you have to give over, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to give over 60% of what you bring in to Chick-fil-A. And you get to keep 40%. And you know what? They've got a line a mile long of people who are willing to sign up for that. And so Joseph was giving the people in Egypt a much better deal than Chick-fil-A gives people today. Thought I would just throw that little insight in case you're wanting to go into that business. So the question I asked last week that I still have not been able to answer, it's the second year of the famine. There are still 5 years of famine to go. Joseph is offering to give them seed to plant their crops, and then they bring in 20% and give it to Pharaoh. Now, what's the problem with that idea? There's still 5 years of famine left to go. I don't know how the people are going to grow anything during a time of famine. There must be some explanation. I'm just a little bit baffled by that. Now, in chapter 47, verse 27, after the Israelites settled in the land of Goshen, they multiplied greatly. You remember how many people came down from the land of Canaan? We're told that there were 70. And you add in a few more, and one writer I looked at said there were probably 79 people who came down from Canaan to the land of Egypt in order to survive. All family members of Jacob. Now, that's not a whole lot of people, but when you start multiplying, I don't want to use the term rabbits, but that's the one a lot of people use, multiplying like rabbits, over a period of about 215 years, we're talking about from the time that they arrived in the land of Egypt until the time of the Exodus. And during those years, their census numbers grew amazingly. And before long, they were a huge nation numerically, which scared the Egyptians, especially the Egyptians in power. It scared them to death because they didn't necessarily appreciate these Hebrews because they were sheep herders, and the Egyptians hated sheep herders. And here they are, they're just growing and growing. And one writer I read said, according to the last census before they left the land of Egypt, there were over 600,000 Israelites. Now, wait a minute, not just 600,000. You know how they counted things back then, and even in the first century, men only counted. And sorry, ladies, but if you lived back then, you didn't get a vote in anything. And so they numbered the nation by the number of men, around 600,000, and you multiply that exponentially, and you're probably talking about 1.5 million people that are going to leave the land of Egypt. You can see why the Pharaoh in charge at that time didn't want to let them go. He was making a lot of money off of these people because he had turned them into slaves. And he made their lives miserable. And they wanted to get out of Dodge as fast as they could. And so, by the time Moses came around, it's a little wonder that the Egyptians were afraid of the children of Israel. They'd become a great nation. Jacob now is 130 years old, according to the text. That's how old he was when he came down to Egypt. He lived there another 17 years before he died, and tonight we're going to be approaching his death. So he died at the age of 147. That sounds pretty astronomical to us, doesn't it? We don't have anybody who lives to that kind of age these days. I want to say the oldest person in recorded history lived to be 124. And that just sounds almost ridiculous to me that you could still be living at that age. But Jacob was still living at the age of 147. Now, his son Joseph died at a much more normal age, even by today's standards. He lived to be 110, not nearly as old as his father. Now, Jacob is making preparations for eternity. Excuse me when I take a little sip here to keep going. That's the bane of being a public speaker, is when your throat gets dry, you can't do very much. Kind of like running out of gas. So, in our study tonight, Jacob is making these preparations to go and be with God. And I wonder, how many of you have actually done preparation work for your demise, for the day when you die, that you don't leave a lot of work to your kids and grandkids? I remember seeing a book. I want to say it was at Sam's Club, could have been Costco, in their book section, and they always have some interesting books. This one was written to my generation, the baby boomers, and it was about how you get rid of most of your stuff so that your kids and grandkids don't have to do the work, which really does sound like a reasonable thing to do. I've got a good friend from the gym when I lived in Shreveport, and when his parents died up in New York, he and his brother and a couple of other family members went up there, and they started emptying out the house. And there was a lot of furniture that was still in good shape. They called a used furniture store and had the guy come out and give them a bid. How much do you think he offered? Well, let's just say my friend John was staggered when he was offered $500, take it or leave it. And we're talking about several $1,000s worth of stuff. And they really didn't have much of a choice. And so they walked away with just a little bit of money in the pocket, maybe enough for gas money to get home. But most of you probably, if you're my age or older, you've done some preparation for the end of time when you leave this earth. Linda and I had a rude awakening, and I hope this doesn't happen to anybody else the way it happened to us. But back, wow, it's been 44 years ago when we had our accident that claimed the life of our son Eric, who was born here at the Murray Callaway County Hospital. He was 2 years and 2 months old. Just a wonderful little boy, in Bible class all the time, loved Bible class. John Dale preached his funeral. Jerry Bowles led the church in children's songs. And we buried Eric out at the Murray Cemetery. And Linda and I still go by there once in a while to visit his grave. Not because we attach any significance to the grave, but we like to just look at the tombstone and realize our little boy who lived with us for 2 years and 2 months, his body was buried there. And we decided one day when we die, and we have no way of knowing when that's going to be, I could drop dead tomorrow, but we contacted the city of Murray. Even though we were not living in the city limits at the time, they were willing to let us have a couple of plots next to Eric for a really cheap price. And since then, we've had 2 plots just waiting for us. And I don't know when we're going to use them one day, but hey, it's the one thing that we have done to kind of prepare. Now, let me go on a little bit because I've done a little bit more than that. I asked one of my good friends in ministry that I grew up with, went to Harding University and to Harding Graduate School with him, if I predecease him, if he would say a few words at my service. And of course, he was glad to do it. And then I asked my 3 living children if they would take part in the service. And they're not real sure about it yet, but I'm sure when the time comes they'll do it, because when their grandparents died, they actually had a role in the grandparents' funeral. They got up before the people at the funeral home and talked about their grandmother, about their grandfather. I told my kids there is one thing I want at my final farewell party. I want some good songs, spiritual, uplifting songs. But one of the songs that I want them to sing is the song, Amazing Grace. And Linda and I are big fans of the Irish group Celtic Thunder. They are amazing, the tenors and basses and how they blend their voices. And 95% of their music is instrumental. But I discovered they've got one a cappella song, and you can go online, you can look it up because it is so amazing. It's Amazing Grace. And they sing that song a cappella. Now, you know, when John Newton wrote that song, there were only 3 verses to the song. And so, when Celtic Thunder sings the song, they only sing the 3 verses. They don't sing that 4th verse that we all love. You know the one I'm talking about? When we've been there 10,000 years, bright, shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. I love that. And every congregation I've ever been at, they love that. It's like they just come alive on that 4th verse. But John Newton didn't write it. In fact, from the research I gathered, it came along during the days of slavery. And it was one of the songs that was sung by African Americans working in the field or in their homes, their houses where they were kept. And they added that 4th verse. And from my research, the first time that 4th verse actually appeared in print was in a book by Harriet Beecher Stowe. I bet you know the name of the book, don't you? Uncle Tom's Cabin. And she wrote the words of the 4th verse of Amazing Grace that we still sing today. So now you know a little bit of history about that song that maybe you didn't already know. I'm a history buff, and so I really enjoy getting into that stuff. Now, as Jacob neared the end of his life, he called Joseph to give him instructions for how he was to be buried. And in chapter 47, verse 29, he told his favored son, "Do not bury me in Egypt." We talked about that a little bit last week. If you've ever been in a foreign land, among foreign people, you may love your time there, but the last thing you want to do is be buried there. You want them to take your bones back to Kentucky or to Texas or wherever you're from. Jacob was that way. He told Joseph, "Do not bury me in Egypt." And he went so far as making Joseph take a vow. So he was really serious about it. And we're going to find that Joseph kind of did the same thing when it came his time to die. So Jacob says to his son, "Bury me with my fathers. Swear to me that you will bury me with my fathers." Now Jacob would be dead and gone. He would have no way of knowing. But while he was still alive, that was an important thing to him. I've got a friend who immigrated from Russia. She and her husband both were medical doctors. And they were smart, but the wife had a kind of twisted sense of humor. And her father, who still lived over in Russia, asked her, "What are you going to do with my body when I die?" And he probably wanted to know if she was going to cremate him or bury him. She said, "Dad, I'm just going to put you out with the garbage." Well, I don't think he really appreciated that answer. Now, in Genesis 48, in our study tonight, in verses 1 through 5, We're going back to Genesis chapter 41, verse 45, and we're told that Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian wife named Asenath. We're not told because we don't have any paintings, we don't have any way to know what she looked like, but what do you think she looked like? Pharaoh had Joseph on a pedestal. He respected this man so much that he let him become the governor of all of Egypt. I can imagine that the woman that Pharaoh chose for Joseph was a stunner, a knock your eyes out kind of beauty. And her name was Asenath. That's pretty much all we know about this woman. That is until Jacob comes down to Egypt. Now, Joseph had twin sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. We know about Ephraim and Manasseh because when you study the 12 tribes of Israel and you memorize that list, they're down the list near the end, and they're the only ones that aren't actual sons of Jacob. They're grandsons. And you know what Jacob says to Joseph? He says, from now on, any children that you have will be yours. But rest assured, from this moment on, Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine. And so he claimed those boys as his own. And those of you who are grandparents, you probably understand that. Linda and I spent 9 years up in New Jersey after our grandsons were born. And they were just little tykes, and we loved every minute of it, and it went by way too fast. But you know what we would do when we would talk about them? We would say, I wonder how our boys are doing. Our boys. Not my daughter and son-in-law's boys, but our boys. And that's the way Jacob felt about Ephraim and Manasseh. They were grandsons, but they were sons in the way that he treated them. In chapter 48, verse 8, when they are brought near, he seems not to know who they are. Now, he was excited that he had a couple of grandsons that had been born during the time that he was in the land of Canaan. He had never seen them before. And his eyesight was really bad. Some of you probably can identify with that. I am starting to be one of those old people who complains about driving at night because the glare hurts my eyes. Jacob had never seen these boys, and when they were introduced to him, you know what he did? He held them and he kissed them. Linda and I were planning to go to New Jersey for Thanksgiving, just a couple of weeks away. And then this whole thing with the air traffic controllers blew up. And we got a family member, close family member, who worked as an air traffic controller pretty much his whole life, and he just shook his head and said, it's just a big mess. And then our daughter wrote us and said, one of her friends had to wait 8 hours for a flight. I saw in the news another man who missed his flight 3 times because they canceled it and canceled it and canceled it. And so our daughter said, you might want to rethink coming up here for Thanksgiving. And as much as we hate to, because that's one of my favorite holidays in the whole wide world, because you get to eat turkey and dressing and cranberry sauce. I skipped the pumpkin pie. And watch the Dallas Cowboys. I'm from Texas. And so I love Thanksgiving. It's going to hurt not to go for Thanksgiving, to have to sit in our cabin, just the two of us, twiddling our thumbs, wondering what the kids are doing and wishing we could be there. You know that kind of feeling. So Jacob, he hugged and kissed his grandsons, and then he told Joseph, I want to give them a blessing. And that was a big deal back in that day and time. I don't know if any of you have ever done that with your kids. We've not done that. I can tell you, I won't tell them, I can tell you the order in which we would like to give the blessing. It was a big deal. And we know that even Jacob, with his twin brother Esau, the blessing that Isaac was going to give them, and they cheated each other, and it was just a big mess. And now here we are. And it's Joseph. And his boys are about to get the blessing. And the old man, Jacob, also known as Israel, reached out his hands. And Joseph brought Ephraim, who was the younger of the two boys, and he put him on the left-hand side so that Jacob would put his hand on that boy to give the blessing. And then he brought the oldest of the two, Manasseh, and he brought him up to the right side. And he wanted that boy, the oldest by just a few minutes, to be the one to get the blessing. And you know what happened if you have followed this story. When it came time, even though he had bad eyesight, he knew which boy was going to get the main blessing. And so, instead of putting his hands on their heads left and right, he crossed his arms and put his left hand on Manasseh's head and his right hand, the primary blessing hand, on Ephraim's head. Joseph did not like that. In fact, when you read the text, you're kind of reading between the lines, get the idea that he got angry with his dad because he messed up. He gave the wrong kid the main blessing. And Jacob said, nope, I got it right because God got it right. Sometimes I'm asked by people to give my judgment about somebody's eternal salvation. Boy, that's a tough one. When somebody who's not part of our fellowship, but they are a believer, and they ask you, what do you think about me? Am I going to be lost or saved? And Linda and I were on a cruise, had about 4 people who asked the same question at the same time. I'd already told them that I was a preacher, quote unquote a pastor, that's the name they use, and they wanted to know, what do you think about us? One of them was Catholic, another one was Baptist, another one was what we call an out-of-duty member of the Church of Christ. And I scratched my head for a minute, and I thought, I can really get in a lot of trouble right now. And so I said to them, what I say is not going to make a difference one way or the other when it comes to your eternal salvation. You know what? I could get it right, but I could get it wrong. And then I pronounced my judgment that caught him by surprise. And they all were very pleased. I said, I might get it wrong, but rest assured, God will get it right. Every single time. And on the judgment day, when people hear those wonderful words, enter into the joy of your master, versus the awful words of depart from me, I never knew you, God will get it right. And that's rather sobering, isn't it? Because, man, I want to be saved. I really, really do. And I don't know if I'm going to get it right. I believe in the mercy and the grace and the love of God. But I'm also a little bit like one of the older men, older than the baby boomers, who said one time at the dinner table, talking about a devout Christian, said, I hope that when I get to the judgment day, that I have done enough to be saved. Wow. That broke the heart of his son, who was a well-known preacher in the brotherhood, that his dad had never gotten the message of grace and carried around that weight, such a heavy weight, that I've got to do more and more and more in order for God to save me. I hope that you're not in that boat. So Jacob blessed his two grandsons, and Joseph was upset with his dad. But then Jacob said these wonderful words. I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also. The joy that Jacob must have had at that moment, because he thought Joseph was dead, torn apart by wild animals. You know the story of the coat of many colors that his brothers had ripped and put goat blood on it. And for years, Jacob had lived with that reality, or so he thought, that Joseph was dead. And now, after all these years down in the land of Egypt, he finds out that Joseph is alive. Not only that, but he has a daughter-in-law, an Egyptian lady named Asenath, who was probably drop-dead gorgeous. And he had two wonderful grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And when the 12 tribes are listed out, there are 11 full tribes and 2 half-tribes. And often we refer to Ephraim and Manasseh as half-tribes. So Jacob then hugged and kissed his grandsons, and it must have been a very emotional moment. In verses 15 and 16, we have the blessing. Jacob gave his grandsons a blessing, and Joseph was not happy with it because he thought he got it wrong. His hands were on the heads of the wrong grandsons. Now, when you go to the next chapter, we're going to see a list of each one of the sons of Jacob and what he thought about them. Some of the boys, there were 12 of them in all. Some of the boys were highly regarded by their father. Others were not at all. And so you start with Reuben. Remember good old Reuben. The one who, when Joseph was put in the pit, a 17-year-old boy was put in the pit, Reuben wanted to secretly come back and rescue Joseph. And when he came back and the pit was empty, the pit of his stomach was empty as well. And then you have Simeon and Levi. They're mentioned together in verses 5 through 7. Levi, of course, being the man after whom the priestly tribe was mentioned. And then Judah in verses 8 through 12. And we talk about the Lion of Judah and our Savior came from that tribe. And then in verse 13, you have Zebulun. Verses 14 and 15, Issachar. Verses 16 through 18, you have Dan. Verse 19, you have Gad. Verse 20, you have Asher. Verse 21, you have Naphtali. And then in verses 22 through 26, you have Joseph, and finally in verse 27, you have Benjamin. Now next week, we're going to look at the death of Jacob. And I don't know if I'm going to have any say in how I die. I do not believe in assisted suicide, and so rest assured it won't be that way. And a lot of my relatives have just gone almost instantly. My grandmother down in South Alabama at the age of 60, coming home from church on a Sunday night, my grandfather driving. When he turned into the driveway, a car came speeding down the highway and T-boned him, killed my grandmother instantly. I don't think my dad ever got over that for the rest of his life. But my grandfather in the hospital for a long time. My uncle, their second child, Uncle John, in his 30s, was out fishing. And after my grandmother died, Uncle John started coming to church. That wasn't something that he did as a rule. And my mom and dad were thrilled that Uncle John was coming to church. And then we got the news that Uncle John had fallen out of his boat. They brought the dredging equipment, dredged the Tombigbee River, and they pulled up his body, and everybody thought he had drowned. But my uncle, who knew a little bit about medicine, when he saw the autopsy report that said there was no water in Uncle John's lungs, that is prima facie evidence that that person did not drown. In all likelihood, heart attack or stroke, probably was dead by the time he hit the water. Our next door neighbor, 57 years old, working in the yard, a member of the church in Searcy, Arkansas, where I was preaching. Slender, tall, sweet lady, working in her yard, dropped dead at 57, right on the spot. And I preached her funeral. And then one of my fellow ministers there in Searcy, who also taught at Harding, a great guy. He had studied in Europe, had a doctorate from St. Andrews. If you know anything about higher education, you know that's elite. Ken was only 58 years old, playing racquetball with a Harding kid. And Ken started to complain about chest pains. And he went out and he sat down on the bench. And the kid ran to get help. And by the time he came back, Ken was on the floor, dead. And then one of our really good friends in Houston, I helped preach his funeral. He was 65 years old. He ran an engineering firm in Houston, had several locations around the country, was tremendously successful, and a really, really neat guy. And I didn't find out till after the fact that every year when the congregation, and if I mentioned it, you would know it, probably if you know anything about congregations in the Houston area, big church. When they got to the end of the year, if they had a shortfall, no matter how much it was, Jess would always step up, dig down into his pocket, into his bank account, and it didn't matter if we're talking $10,000 or $50,000, and he would write a check for the entire amount of the deficit. I don't know if that was good or bad, because that could enable some churches to not really try to give like they should. But Jess was that committed that he would do it. At age 65, he was playing golf, and he was on the 18th hole, and he started to have chest pains, and he told his party, "Go on, play through, and come back and get me." When they came back to get him, he was keeled over. Never said another word. And I went to Houston and helped preach his funeral. There have been a lot of cases like that I've known, and I'm sure some of you have known, where people just have died almost instantly, and then others where it's been just dragged out, like my wonderful brother-in-law, my wife's brother, who died a year and a half ago with brain cancer. And he fought that over and over again. 3 major surgeries, all of the radiation, all of the chemo that they could possibly give him. And they had told him up front, expect 1 to 2 years. Glioblastoma, if you've ever heard of that brain tumor, it's a death sentence. He lasted 14 months. And then he was gone. I could go on, but I don't need to, because we're out of time already. But I do want to call your attention to our study next week. It's going to be the Wednesday night prior to Thanksgiving. And we're going to study about the death and the burial of Jacob in chapter 49. And then we're going over into chapter 50, because in chapter 50, we start to read about Joseph and the plans that he was making for his own demise. So come back next Wednesday night, and we'll study more about the life and times of Joseph. And I thank you for your kind attention tonight. God bless you. Shake hands and be friendly.